Of the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We start with item 1. Apologies, please. Sorry, Geraint.
Thank you, Chair. There's apologies from Councillor Graham Smith and Mr Mike Cody.
Item 2, declarations of interest. Would members like to sign the book of interest as it's going around? Councillor Seaborn.
I'd like to declare an interest that I'm a governor at Cwmbran High School. My wife is the chair of governors there, and I also have a grandson who attends that school. And I'd also like to declare that I have one grandson at St Albans School. He's a pupil there.
Therese.
Can I declare I'm a governor at Gwynflew and Cwmbran High.
It's Karen.
Governor. And I'm a governor at Pontnewydd Primary School. Thank you.
I think just to declare that I'm a governor, a community council governor at Crossgillet Primary.
Chair,
do we need to declare the primary schools or just the comprehensive?
I was going to sort of advise members that the list of schools that are probably of relevance here, those in Appendix 2 and 3, and it's Abersychan School, Croesy School, because I believe they're comprehensives. Previously, Fairwater High and Llantarnan School, St Albans RC High, West Monmouth Comprehensive and Ysgol Gyfun Gwynflew. So if any members are governors of those schools or were previously governors of the two schools mentioned there, they can declare that as a personal interest, or if they or anyone with whom they have a close personal association works or attends the school, then that is a personal interest to declare. Also, I'd like to advise members that if during the course of discussions that members refer to a particular school which is not on this list, but if they have a particular interest in relation to that school, they can declare that at the appropriate time. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Dalith, I should have brought you in the beginning, but so it's just really the comps that you need to declare.
I forgot to mention, Chair, that my wife and myself and my grandson were former at Fairwater High School as well.
Governor of Our Lady of the Angels, who has a direct contact with St Albans, and I also have family members who are pupils at St Albans School.
Okay, and I just need to declare that I have a niece who is a member of the teaching staff at Abersychan School. To agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of September. You have the minutes before you there, pages 5 to 10. Can I take them all on block? Are you happy to approve the minutes?
Moves to record.
Thank you. Item 4, the action sheet, pages 11. Are you happy there that those actions have been completed? Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to know if the first item on the agenda, 5.2, it says in the action taken, information received and passed to Councillor Jeffries, which is on my left. Was that sent to all governors? All members of this committee?
I don't think it was, so you're requesting that all governors have a copy of that report?
Please.
Okay, on agreement? Gareth, thank you.
Just to come in briefly, sorry members, just going back to the apologies, just to confirm so that it's on record, Mr Sean Sheeran has sent his apologies. He was admitted into hospital yesterday, so apologies for him.
Move on then to agenda item 5, which is a report on school attainment. And you can see there the suggested scrutiny activity, the 3 critical processes the committee may wish to assure itself of the progress and intermediate impact over the coming overview and scrutiny cycle. What I'm keen to do really is to just stick to these 3 scrutiny activities, and if there are any issues there that come up, that we can refer back to the Schools Monitoring Committee or a Task and Finish group. So if we just look at those 3 main scrutiny items. Okay, we have Sharon Davis, Dermot, Julian and Ed from the AS. Would you do the report, please, Sharon?
As you're fully aware, this week we've got our friends in from Eston. Our inspectors are in. We're in the middle of our Eston inspection. The local authority was inspected back in October 2011, and Eston made the 5 recommendations, as you'll see, which is in the report. After monitoring visit in February, further recommendations were added, and the Education Department, local authority, was placed into special measures. So, as I said, we are in the middle of our Eston inspection now. We feel as a local authority that previous to now you've scrutinised our SER, and we've done a member seminar on our Key Stage 4 data as well, analysis. We feel that as a local authority that we are adequate, that we have met all the recommendations, and we're going to look at some of the progress to date in light of those recommendations as well. As you're fully aware, the local authority, when we were placed in special measures, the Welsh Government, we were working with the Welsh Government Recovery Board, and they've been instrumental in guiding us, as it were, in our recommendations. We feel that we've made significant progress in Key Stage 4, in particular compared to where they were in 2011 at the point of inspection. Overall, we've, in the past 4 years, at Level 2 inclusive, we've made a gain of 13.6%. Torfaen's performance this year increased by 3%, and we've had another, it's still unverified, but we think we've had a tiny uplift that we've made 3.4%. Again, that's still unverified, but the second bit of data that's come in at the minute, we've got a slighter gain again. So that 3.4% from last year. We're now ranked 13th in Wales for our Level 2 inclusive. And there's, if you look at Appendix 2, it shows the trend data for Key Stage 4. Are there any questions on the Key Stage 4 data before we move on? Or
any questions, members?
Well, this question, Chair, is school specific. Use your mic. There is question 2, but it is school specific. Do you want me to? Yeah, it's just, it says, we're looking at Appendix 2. Basically, why is attainment in Fairwater at Level 2 inclusive dropped when it's an SEC school?
A fair point. The targets under Schools Challenge Cymru, the school goes under monthly AIB meetings where myself, Julian, the Schools Challenge Cymru advisor is present, the head teacher, chair of governors and the representative primary cluster head teacher, and everything is shared, if you like, by the head teacher. Data, various different departments are brought in as well to discuss their targets, to discuss progress on targets. Now, all through the year, the systems at Fairwater were, I still believe, were very tight. We were given a very detailed report, and I'm sure Julian will back me up on this, on every meeting, where they could pinpoint where every child was and what intervention was going on and the progress to date. So they did meet their target on their Level 2 inclusive. However, it wasn't as great as the previous years. performance. It was 55%, I believe, in 2014, and last year it was about 51.8. So they had met their target, but they hadn't made as much gains as the previous year.
Just to add something to that, I think that's a really important point about, and obviously some of the paper goes on to talk about the accuracy of target setting and why that's important. Clearly knowing individual children's performance and extrapolating up from that data to get the target for the school is critical for us. That means in some occasions we may not see year-on-year progress in that overall trajectory for the school because it's built on that very detailed knowledge of individual children. Clearly our aspiration is to improve overall, and there's other work, and we can talk to that in terms of how we extend the reach of schools and being able to support pupils to further progress. But in terms of Fairwater for that year, that was built on a very detailed knowledge by the head and her team of those individual pupils, and that was an appropriate target for them, which they exceeded.
Yeah, could I come back? I mean, I'd like to be a little less school specific on this. I mean, to be honest, I can see that we are congratulating ourselves on a 3% year-on-year improvement, and overall 13% improvement. But if you actually look at last year's improvement, it's centred around 2 schools. That 3% has been made up by Westmont's 8% increase and Gwynthew's 12% increase. You know, if you took those 2 schools out, there would be virtually no year-on-year increase, which I find a little disappointing.
Unfortunately, you can't measure school progress like that across an authority because you've got to realise where you're starting from. If you're starting from a low point, then once you get your systems correct, you will make the big gains. Once those systems are correct and in place, then to make the big gains is far more difficult, and then you're down to 1 or 2%. And what's actually happened over the last several years is that if all the schools had all made their gains at the same time in the same year, then what you'd have had is a massive hike across the piece, and then that would have been it. But the year-on-year increase is because the schools are progressing at different rates. And I can quote specific examples. Ysgol Gyfun Gwynthrew, for instance, if you look at the maths, the reason they had a big hike this year was because in previous years they weren't using the early entry maths in January as a diagnostic tool, and therefore sort of 2 years ago their maths took a hit, which held back their level 2 inclusive, which therefore had a negative impact on the overall progress at Torfaen. Following interventions with the local authority and EAS, those systems were put in place, so you get the big hike in the maths, which then has that sort of impact. So what you've got is then 7 separate institutions who are all starting at different places along the school improvement journey, and the closer you are to maxing out the potential of your pupils, the more difficult it becomes in terms of seeing big year-on-year improvements. And it's simply a case of that, because all the schools didn't start at the same baseline, if you like.
Yeah, whilst I can support that, and I fully understand what you're saying and what Dermot's saying, schools aren't going to work exponentially. It doesn't work like that. However, I'd still come back and say, well, you know, Gwynthew's 12% and Westmont's 8%. If it hadn't have been for them, there may have even been a slight dip in this year's performance, which does leaves me concerned, because obviously I'm not expecting every school to have a 3% improvement every year, but when you've got a 12% and an 8% driving a 3% increase, it does tell me that the other 5 schools, there's a bit of an issue somewhere.
Just to add a little from a regional perspective, 5 of the 7 schools in Torfaen improved last year, which is a favourable proportion compared with the other local authorities that we have. I note that a couple of them are a couple of percent. You do tend historically to have this situation in all local authorities where some schools will increase, but you will always get some that go down because of the individual cohort variation. There's nothing that would alarm us in the Torfaen picture of the balance between those that have made significant gains, which Julian's explained the reasons for, and those that have made smaller gains, and the two that have had expected declines in relation to target.
Do you wish to come in?
Just to come back to Fairwater. If you look at the free school meal results for Key Stage 4 Level 2 inclusive English, Welsh and Maths, they outperformed the overall cohort. Do you know the reason for that?
The free school meal numbers, there was a significant increase, which we're pleased by. It was very low numbers of pupils on free school meals in Fairwater, and the analysis shows that none of those had alignments with significant special needs. So they were able pupils that were, and the school's done the right things with those pupils to ensure that they achieve in terms of tracking their progress, making sure they're achieving.
Yes, going on from the, getting on again with the free school meals, which was a thing which I know struck all of us, was the sudden collapse in the free school meals pupils' performance at St Albans from 50 to 14. But again, it's this thing about percentages and numbers and all the rest of it. It's a thing which I know a number of members of this committee have said, that sometimes the percentages can be very, very, very misleading.
So you're getting quite excited. I don't know who's going to answer the question.
I've rehearsed this one so many times. Obviously, being the challenge advisor for St Albans. St Albans is at the mercy of very small free school meal numbers. So every pupil counts for a large percentage. Last year, they had 15 free school meal pupils, 14 of which all passed the level 2 with 6 A stars to Gs. Two of them actually attained 12 A stars to Cs. A third one attained 10 A stars to Cs. But when you boil it down, one pupil has never ever set foot in the school. They were a managed move from another school at risk of permanent exclusion, so there was a managed move. That was the only person not to get the level 2. The level 2 inclusive, though, is the one that they use for the 3-year weighted average. And unfortunately, in that year group, one of them, for instance, was only attended school for 63% of the time because she was the sole registered carer for her bipolar mother. Another one attended school for 43.6%, and part attended in the PRU. We had another instance there of another free school meal pupil who basically, father was the sole parent and was imprisoned 2 weeks before the exams. So when you go through it, and it literally boiled down to 2 pupils, and unfortunately, one of those pupils got an A in English and missed her C in maths by 1%, and they had the paper remarked. And when they questioned the girl, because she's come back into the 6th form, they found out the parents had actually thrown her out of the home during the exam season for something that she'd done, and had spent the entire 6 weeks of the summer exam season sleeping on her friend's floor. So the school has done everything within its that was possible to do, and yet one pupil has made that difference, and they dipped down to 28.5 below the floor target. So when you see that, I think if you look at their targets in 2 years' time, I think they're predicting an in-year target for FSM free school meals of 78%. Because it just happens that the small numbers that year happen to be more able pupils who are attending regularly. And so it becomes a bit of a lottery. And I know you can turn around and say, well, the school should know these people. They do. That's why I can regurgitate these facts, because I've had this conversation so many times. So
would it be helpful if we had the numbers then, in future?
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than the percentages, do you think that would be more helpful?
Yeah. I always feel that, to be fair, pupil numbers is sometimes far more telling. It's like with the targets, when we were discussing which schools had undershot, missed targets. Sometimes it's 2 pupils, And it could be the same with the benchmark quota, you know. It can literally be, some of our primary schools, their benchmark quota to get into quarter one is 100% because of the pupil number. So I always think it's a good to look at pupils.
Can we come back on that then? How is that now going to affect St Albans School going forward? Because I understand that they will.
Right. Basically, last year St Albans was a green category school. In fact, nothing has changed on the leadership and management. In fact, it's actually improved. They've brought in additional systems to supplement what they do. So the leadership and everything in that school and the tracking is excellent. But because it's gone below the 30% floor target for the 3-year weighted average, it can only be a maximum of 3 for step 1. So whereas it should have been a 2, automatically, no matter what else happens in the school, it's a 3. So it couldn't be a green school. So it affects it from that point of view. In terms of affecting the quality of the teaching, the provision and tracking, it'll have no effect on the school, but it can have an effect, obviously, with school roles sometimes. You know, parents look to the better school. And unfortunately, some pupils may well use categorization, which, as we know, is about just the level of support the school needs.
But it's important that this committee knows.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And as we're all, I don't know how many of you are aware, but of course St Albans have been inspected next week. You know, and whilst their data actually shows, it's the strongest data set in terms of benchmark performance that they've had for several years. Their data is always good. But they've been capped as a 3 and gone from a green to a yellow because of those two. So it's all in the SER with the school, it's all there, and obviously to have the discussion with Estin, and that's why I can rehearse it with you like this. It's all well rehearsed, ready for Estin, but obviously it does have an impact.
Any other questions, members? No?
So we've discussed about the Key Stage 4 data, and you've got all the facts in front of you there with the different percentages that we've achieved at level 2, at level 1. With maths, again, we achieved an increase over 3 years of 11%, significantly above the average for South East Wales region of 8.2%. We're fully aware that, you know, with our literacy, that's not as strong as our maths, and that's an area we'll be working with, and that's an area that we are looking at. We've had a conversation, we're working very closely with EAS and the provision of literacy and the support and the intervention going into our schools, and that's something as well we're working with our head teachers as well. We're meeting next week as part of not only teacher assessment and narrowing the gap between teacher assessment and national tests, but it's the whole looking at teaching and learning, the numeracy and literacy, and to see how are we going to narrow that gap as well, and that'll have an impact at Key Stage 4 as well. It's all interlinked in that respect.
In regarding the report, if you like, it relates to the South East Wales, if you like. Am I missing something here? What's the relevance of linking us in with South East Wales as opposed to? I understand Wales, but why South East Wales? Is it because it's a more of a pan-Gwent outlook, or what?
I think you're referring to the data comparison, yeah? The reason for that is that the All Wales figures are not yet finally published. There's a process going on where these are the first and second provisional data. There's still room for, well, in the second, the remarks have been taken into consideration that schools could have done. We won't have the final picture until January. Whilst we calculate those and we're confident on them reasonably across the region, Wales don't partly publish them, but they're subject to change. That's hence the comparison regionally at this stage. Self-evaluation in the future would compare nationally as well.
As we go down, we've got our schools Challenge Cymru schools. They've had a 2% lift. If we think of the 4 schools that were involved with schools Challenge Cymru, Fairwater, Abersychan, Llantarnam and Westmorn, there was a 2% uplift there across those 4 schools. And especially, as you all know, with Westmorton in particular, achieving 8.3%. So that's certainly a success story in that respect. However, we do recognise that there is far more work to do, and that, you know, in light of Abersychan, where they went down rather than had a lift, we now know the story behind that. The next step, what to do. This leadership review has been conducted at the school. There's a new head teacher in there. There's a new head of department for English in there. So all the weaknesses are being addressed, and we should see a much better uplift next year.
We are discussing the schools, Challenge Cymru schools, even as it's fairly vaguely. I mean, we've got a question here about how do the EAS and the Schools Challenge Cymru work together? But I think, you know, looking at these, considering the amount of money that's been put in, considering this has been the first year of Schools Challenge Cymru, and I understand that this is really the baby of the Welsh Government Education Secretary. It's certainly not the improvement that I would have thought we would have seen for that level of extra funding. Hopefully that will be reflected next year. However, I mean, have we been in talks with Welsh Government and with them over these Schools Challenge Cymru results? And are they happy with them?
No, I think nationally the result, the picture is very similar nationally. I think it's a 2% uplift. That when you think there were 40 schools involved in Schools Challenge Cymru, that I think across the board it's been a 2% lift. So no, I wouldn't have thought that they're happy with that. However, there was a review conducted last summer where an independent company spoke to all members and the AIB boards and asked how was the initiative going, what was its best points, what, if anything could be changed, what would change, and how was it working for us. I've yet to see we've yet to have any feedback. This was conducted around June last year. We've yet to see the results of that report. Yeah.
Chair, that's all right. I mean, I just have to say, we're not happy with them either. It's just being blunt. Because that isn't where we would want our schools to be. Clearly, and we've rehearsed some of the context around some of the schools, everyone knows what's happened with Lantarnham. Lantarnham was facing a position where it had no maths staff, I think in November, because of the closure proposal when the school staff were being redeployed. They still made an uplift despite those difficulties, which wasn't what we thought we were going to get at the beginning of the year, but then, you know, clearly we had to respond to the context the school was in. So I still think that was a significant result given what that school was going through. We do have concerns about Abersychan. The new head is very quickly grappling with those issues. I think, you know, Sharon's mentioned the joint leadership review that Julian and Sylvia, the Schools Challenge Cymru Challenge Advisor, were leading on, which took place recently, has really shone a light on some of the ways that we need to move forward quickly, which the new head is really determined to drive. So we do expect to see good progress. But bear in mind the context over time again, it's back to Julian's point about where these schools have been over the last number of years, where Abersychan made significant progress 2014, for instance. So we have to look at this in the whole round. We cannot expect, I think, as you said, Councillor Karen, we're not going to see exponential growth every year. We are going to see steady growth is what we anticipate. Bearing in mind that's built on our understanding where those pupils are at that point that year. But there was a lot more to be done. I think I would say that the communication with the Schools Challenge Cymru wasn't straightforward at the beginning. Is probably a fair way of putting it. And I think we've got clear accountability lines now that are very clear, you know, very definitely embedded. And to answer your question, have we spoken to Welsh Government? I think we've been invited to go and meet the Minister, the Chief Exec, the Executive Member and myself in December. So we'll be raising some of these issues directly with the Minister about our experience of Schools Challenge Cymru and some of the ways that we think we can further improve. The way we can further improve, clearly, is to build on the relationships we've got and the systems that we're developing with Schools Challenge Cymru advisors, so that there are no gaps for anyone to fall through in terms of our understanding of where the schools are at and how we can intervene more timely.
I think we did discuss this in our sort of pre-meeting, and I think we would be fair to say that we decided that we would perhaps look again at the School Challenge Cymru schools and also the deprivation grant to see what impact it's had and how sustainable, the progress is with the amount of money that they've spent. So that might be a timely exercise after you've had your meeting with the Welsh Government.
Slightly come back. I know you want to say something, Sharon, but we are very cognizant of how differently each of these three schools have spent their Schools Challenge Cymru money. I mean, vastly different methods of how they've chosen to do it. So really, I mean, one of the things I'm sort of trying to get a feel for, has there been an enormous change in Abersychan over how the new head teacher is choosing to do it, and how are we coming together with Fairwater and Llantarnam over, because I think there was a bigger difference between how Fairwater and Llantarnam were going to spend their money than there was between Fairwater, Llantarnam and Abersychan. So how are we coming along with that as a sort of...
If I come back to the Fairwater and Llantarnam, as Dermot and Julian alluded earlier, different schools are at different journeys, different paths. So therefore the money was targeted according to their needs for individual schools. Now, if we were to look at Fairwater, out of our 4 schools, I think it'd be fair to say Fairwater would have been borderline a Schools Challenge Cymru school. They were at the cusp, and they benefited because, as you could see over the past years, Fairwater had their performance had gradually risen and risen and risen, and in 2014 they had that uplift of 55%. So that the systems Helen, the head teacher, had put into place were beginning to work for them, and therefore she benefited then by really tightening those systems, and also give her the opportunity with the funding to try different elements that your own school budget might not have, not frivolous, but to say, okay, we've got this opportunity now, we know our target setting's working because we know our children, we know these processes, let's try this now then, because that's the whole point of Schools Challenge Cymru, is to try different things as well within a safety net, and that worked for when you think of Fairwater, they did succeed their target, they hit their target. Llantarnam, a very different story to Fairwater. They were that far behind. They had to, in light of the school closure, staff and pupil morale and the whole teaching and learning was very different, so that's what the money went in there, was to develop the self-confidence. That various programs were used to bring in an Estyn inspector as well to work with the school to really drive up the quality of teaching and learning. And it worked. It did a phenomenal job to get where, over the past year, for Llantarnam to meet their target and exceed their target under school closure, staff leaving, bearing in mind the most able of children, the families had already jumped ship the year before. So for those children there, they really did get value for money in that respect. If we think of coming to Abersychan and your question, well, different head teacher, are they taking a different approach? Yes, they are, but in light of evidence that looking at the plan for last year, looking at the impact and possibly, they've realised last year's plan didn't have the impact they were expecting, so they've reviewed it. They've conducted, Julian's been in with EAS, have conducted a leadership review, and it will look then to adjust and look at really knowing the school and finding the needs of that school. So the money will be well placed this year to match the needs of the school and to develop that school where it needs to be.
There's some questions that we can ask when we revisit the Schools Challenge Cymru schools.
Can I just ask, as I'm not involved with Cumberland High, so I'm really on extra ground, is that the resources are put into Llantarnam, are they still there for the new Cumberland High?
Yes, I'm not sure that what Welsh Government have done is they don't get 2 pots in that respect. They get the 1 pot, but it's a Cumberland High plan, not a Llantarnam plan and not a Fairwater plan combined. It's a new plan for the new school this year, and therefore it's 1 pot of money that they're allocated.
Which is significantly less than the 2 together.
Just to go back to the Schools Challenge Cymru, although the initiative is 2 years, the funding was only for 1 year, and then they'd have funding for the first year with a plan, and then another plan for this year. So again, it wasn't as if they got the funding at the beginning of the first year and it rolled over. It was separate. Does that make it easier? Yeah. Right. We've already discussed our free school meals, but if we look at the percentage of free school meals at Key Stage 4 for our Level 2 inclusive, we have narrowed the gap by 5.35 percentage points. And when you look at the Wales, they've narrowed it by 1.35. So we are making significant moves there. However, we recognise we still need to continue and carry on that journey. But we are narrowing that gap slightly, even though, as Julian said, about certain schools not. We've had some very big gains in other schools. So that will continue to be one of our main focuses as well. And again, then coming to the PDG funding, we have data on a school level basis on how each school is spending their PDG funding, but what we don't have, and we're in negotiations, we're in discussions with the EAS on this, is that we don't have it beyond a school level. We don't have it on an authority level, which is why we can't report to you now as an authority what our PDG looks like. We can tell you on individual school level basis, but not collectively as an authority.
Would you like to?
Yeah.
The reason for that, one of the key measures that we use to judge the performance of schools fairly is free school meals. If anyone's been on my governor training from members, you'll know I focus a lot on the correlation between free school meals and performance. That's not to say that we don't focus on free school meal learners and it's not a limit on their achievement. PDG grant is actually allocated to a school on the amount of free school meals pupils they have. Therefore, the more PDG grant you allocate to a school, the lower their performance you would expect it to be, although the PDG money is used to overcome that. So if you do a correlation on a school-wide, a local authority-wide basis, you will just get that exact same pattern that you would get anyway. So you can't actually say the PDG money overall has had a greater impact. You have to do it on a school-by-school basis of what they're actually doing and qualitatively evaluate what is going on and how that money is used in schools to secure school improvement, which is one of the roles of challenge advisors working with the senior leadership team to ascertain.
And I think the other thing is as well, we talk about PDG a lot, but in schools, of course, they get the PDG, but they also get the EAG, and for some schools, the EAG is bigger than the PDG. And then you start to get this blurred edge, because, you know, they'll employ, say, a teaching assistant to do a particular role, and then trying to unpick whether it was because of a consequence of the PDG fund or the EAG fund is a further complication. And then you've got an even further complication with Schools Challenge Cymru, because, you know, quite often they're pulling from 3 pots sometimes to do one thing. And this isn't a unique issue in Torfaen, this is across Wales. I think anybody who can come up with a fairly straightforward way of teasing out the impact and the progress in terms of local authority of PDG is a bit like, you know, it's the sort of, well, the arc.
Holy Grail.
Holy Grail is the word I'm looking for. But that's not to say that we're not looking at it, because we've had this conversation with Dermot, about trying to provide these figures, and we are looking at ways in terms of calculating value for money for an authority, which it will give you a better thing. But that's a work in progress. It's not something that's really straightforward.
Can we just ask?
Yeah, it's educational speakers again. EIG?
Education Improvement Grant. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Dermot, do you want to say a few words before I jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rees. This sounds like an exercise in knitting fog, if we're not careful, doesn't it? The big issue here for us is about, are we getting the impact for those vulnerable learners? So our discussion when we come back to you will be about how do we have confidence that whatever we're doing, we know what's working well. That's what we need to know about in this. Can we improve on that further? What's having that impact? How big is that impact? Where can we expect to be over the next 2 to 3 years? Should, of course, that funding continue, because there's no guarantee it'll continue beyond the next election. Although the Minister did indicate when he spoke, subject to him being re-elected, etc., that he'd be keen to see that continuing when he spoke to us last Friday. So this is not simple. Proving causality and causal links between a multitude of different interventions is what we're trying to do. So when we come back, and the discussion we're having with the EAS is about, look, we may not be able to pin all of this down and say A plus B equals C every time, but we need to know that what we're doing across our entire school estate is impactful. We need to know what's not working as well, so that we don't waste resources in a very resource-scarce environment on things that aren't having impact. So that's the nature of our discussion. That's what we'll try and unknit the fog and come back with that next time.
Who do you currently report the results of the effects of PDG to?
As it currently stands, the Challenge Advisor goes in, works with the school, and you do a self-evaluation. So if you look at some of the self-evaluation we got on an individual school basis, then you'll see that 83% of the pupils on this particular intervention programme achieve 6 months progress and things like that. So it's done at an individual school level like that, but it doesn't actually get quality assured and rolled up into a value for money figure yet, and that is another issue.
But even with that data, who gets that data?
Well, that sits in with the education and with the EAS. Well, we've got copies of.
And how does that data get to Welsh Government?
That grant, because it's grant money, it's subject to audit. There's various audit returns that our business support teams, from a finance perspective, have to produce on a regular basis that are reported back to Welsh Government on the use of the funding. What it doesn't have on those reports is the impact of the use of that funding.
Doesn't know if it's having impact or not?
Not yet.
I think the issue...
How many years has this been going on? 2 or 3 years now?
Second year for PDG. I think this is the issue, is that there's, if you like, accountancy measures to prove that there are very prescriptive ways in which schools are instructed how they have to spend it, and then it almost becomes a set of financial instructions, and really what we needed to do is give us a set of educational outcomes, not whether it's been spent within the financial remit. What we want to know is if a school is spending £1,000 on 10 children, is it actually improving their life chances and the quality of their education? And let's watch this space. Yeah.
I think that to know, and people who pay their council tax really would like to know.
And we know on a school-to-school level basis, because we get all the information in, there is fantastic practice out there, and we do, when you look at certain school outcomes, we know the money is well spent, they're getting fantastic outcomes for their children. However, we also know that's not consistent in all our schools, and that's what we want to do, is have a common approach that the PDG is hitting the children where it should, and that everybody gets the outcomes they deserve.
Questions? On to your next topic.
Where are we? Right, okay. Yes, here we go. So, as well as, one of our key focuses, if you like, has been outcomes for our learners at Key Stage 4, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 2 and Foundation phase. We haven't been able to do that just as an education service. We have been working across with partners, and we've got a very good relationship, not just with the EAS, but across partnership when we're looking at the CYPIB, looking at NEETs figures, looking at ALN. It's a whole communities first, looking at Flying Start, using all our partners and using the information that we can gain from each other so that we're not duplicating. I'm sure you're aware of, through ALN and through Communities First, the little booklet, Torfaen, I can't, not consistent approach. I've had it all day. It's the continuum, Torfaen continuum approach, where it shows how different partners, alongside not just education service, but how we support our learners, how we support our families as well, because that's key. We can't do it all. There is a wealth of information out there, not just information, but expertise out there, and what we are very aware of, and we have started, and which is why we've gained. We've done so well on the needs, on our vulnerable children, we've had very significant gains. However, we recognise there is far more work to do there, but we are well on the way. We have systems in place, and, we just now need to spread the systems that are working across other areas. Coming back here, you've heard Dermot and myself talking about the relationship. One of the key focuses for us as an education service was the relationships that we have with our head teachers, and I'm sure you're fully aware a few years ago how broken and the lack of what that relationship looked like, or the lack of relationship. We've worked very hard over the last few years to change the climate of how we deal with or how we work rather with our head teachers, and I would say that's one of our success stories to date.
Sorry to interrupt you there. What evidence do you have to show that the relationship with the heads has improved?
The biggest evidence for me, because obviously I wasn't here when the relationship was broken, but for me the one thing I found was last year when we had our first head teachers conference, and how honest, data was shared for the first time between all schools data, the teacher assessment, the national test data. It was shared amongst everybody. And that's the first time we've done that on that level. And the honesty and the conversations and the professional discussions that came from that has allowed us to put key things back into place. Now, I don't think a few years ago that would have happened. The head teachers wouldn't have accepted that in a million years.
So I think some of the specific examples in terms of tangibles, things you can touch as well, because the relationship's critical, isn't it, to making sure we have a meaningful space where we can work together. So the product of that improvement have been around the teacher assessment policies that we've agreed with schools, that schools have written together with us, and the series of changes that we've made around how we support vulnerable learners around additional learning needs, and the role of head teachers who have taken an active role in managing that themselves. So that's a change in the way that local authority officers, in a sense, haven't given away responsibility, because we can't do that, but we're now sharing responsibility with head teachers who are taking the lead in those areas. I think that's very tangible.
So have you carried any survey to measure any change in the view of their relationship with the local authority?
With the local authority, yeah, we surveyed schools late last year. Didn't have the best response rate from schools. It's the best we've ever had, I should add, but we've
sort of conflict with what you've just said. I mean, if there's not a very good response rate, perhaps they're not that interested as you think they are.
Well, no, hands up who likes filling in surveys at the tail end of term. I think there's an issue about how we make sure we capture that view. Bearing in mind, we have a whole series of ways of capturing views from heads, and we wouldn't have the working groups that we have with heads if they weren't willing to participate and do that work outside their day-to-day responsibilities. So we had very strong feedback from schools saying that, and we know that already from feedback from Eston this week as well, because obviously they've met with groups of head teachers, that there's a very strong buy-in, and that schools now recognise there's been a very determined change in focus and in the way that the local authorities are prepared to listen and engage with head teachers. have we finished that piece of work? Have we got every head engaging in the way that we would like to see them engage? Clearly not. Clearly, that's an ongoing piece of work. But I think we've got a very strong, more than foundation to build from. And we get the level of engagement that we need from our heads, particularly around some of the difficult issues. ALN is no small thing in terms of, for example, the ALN budget, which is always under pressure, which is something that lots of schools don't see the global picture, or haven't seen the global picture on. They see the challenge in front of them and want the resource they think they need for that child. We've moved from a position where schools were coming into a panel and making those cases to the position now where schools have accepted they've got their allocation of budget. There's a very small contingency, and schools manage that, and we go along and support them. So schools are making those decisions, how they intervene, and how they can support each other to support those children, which I think is a big shift. So I think there are, again, some tangible examples of how we can really point to saying that relationship is much better. That's not the point, though. The point is, because the relationship's better, we're able to do this joint up working and support school-to-school work, which is increasing going forward.
Julian in there, sorry.
The EAS does do a client-based survey, an annual client-based survey, and it goes out to all heads across the consortia. And the return on that is very high. It's well over 90%. And the thing that's come out really, really positive in that is the now clearly, if you compare it last year's with this year's, the issue around the clarity between the role of the local authority and the role of EAS has gone away. There's a real sort of shift towards the understanding of that, and the focused work around the local authority and the EAS. So if you actually look at that, the results of those surveys, it paints a very, very positive picture about the working of the local authority and the EAS, and in terms of the clarity of roles around it.
Because just to follow up, the clarity of roles, of course, is very important. I'm just wondering why you're getting such a high response rate for your surveys and the local authority doesn't need to be getting very high ones, according to Dermot.
Basically, we have the staff who, the issue is, we sell it to the fact that it's anonymous. And then some heads make the quip that if it's anonymous, why are you sending me another email if I haven't filled it in? And we go from the point of view that that's all we know is the number of emails and so on. So, but basically, we have the staff to be able to relentlessly chase. That's the only thing I can say. We don't provide any sweeteners. But the only thing I would say is, at the moment, we generate it across the consortia, not as individual authorities, but the responses are so large within. If you had an authority which was, should we say, sitting outside, though, they would be glaringly obvious. So,
jumping ahead a bit on the report, you've made the remark about the clarification of the roles, because this was on page 24 about the key activity to deliver improvement. You made the remark here about the local authority has clarified its role as commissioners of school improvement. But it's on page 24 of the report. And because and the thing is, what I would like to know is what's actually been clarified, what's the reason for the clarification or reasons, and what's the result in that context?
I think that may have been part of a previous presentation we made to the committee. I think going back some time ago, and again it was a criticism that was picked up by Eston themselves, that there was a confusion in head teachers' minds about why does the local authority have anything to do with school improvement at one point, I think. So why do we have a separation? I think we've talked about in the past. So what is the business plan? What is the commission? As we used, that was the word we used, but it's really what's the business plan for the EAS. So what does the challenge advisor do? What does Sharon do? What does the head of education do? And what is that? Where is that relationship in terms of the ultimate accountability? Because most head teachers encounter school improvement professionals from the EAS coming into school on a regular basis, but clearly the statutory responsibility sits with you and me. In terms of where the law stands. So if things aren't going well, it comes back to us, which is why we've got Eston with us this week. And I think it took heads some time to understand, well, hang on, who's got the power and the control here? And they were anxious, quite rightly, that, are we going to, as a local authority, going to ask them to do the same thing that the ES was asking them to do, and are there mixed messages? And that takes us right back into 2011 and why we went into special measures. So over the first, certainly over the last 2 years, we've spent significant energy. So I think it was back to the time we had Chris Harries as the Principal Challenge Advisor in, before Julian's time, before John Rawlings' time, when we looked and we worked very closely with the Recovery Board and created a document with the ES to really define that this is what the local authority's responsibilities are and this is how we'll discharge them. This is what Challenge Advisors do, Principal Challenge Advisors, and they're all of the BIS team. And this is our expectation of schools. Now that, I think, is much, much clearer for everyone. I think the result of that is that we now have a much closer and clearer and more fluid relationship with the EAS. Our understanding of schools' performance is it's better than it's ever been. I think our communication is completely sorted around that. I think schools now get a very clear picture of how they get support, where that support comes from, for what purposes, and if there is challenge, and clearly, as committee knows, we've had to put a warning letter into the school this year. It's not impossible we may see a further use of statutory powers this year as well. They're very clear that that's the local authority with its statutory hat on, but we will continue to work with our colleagues through the EAS and also obviously through our internal mechanism with Sharon. So I think that's now much clearer. I hope that answers your question.
Coming back to the head teachers' roles, and not just the head teachers, the schools, the governors as well. We've set up consultant governors. They seem to be working very well, working with other governors to upskill, to support. And again, it comes back to what Dermot says, it is about supporting our schools so that they become self-improving, so that they do become better equipped for our learners. We're not there. Yes, we do have our statutory powers, and yes, there is accountability, but the way we are working with our schools now, it's working with them and not working down to them, if that makes sense. And we have worked extremely hard on re-establishing those relationships, and I think we do have a long way to go, but it's more now the co-construction of things that we're working on now, because the relationship is there, the momentum is there, and because we all want the same things, and we want to work collaboratively to achieve those outcomes for our learners. So it is all about that co-construction. As Dermot quite rightly said, the best example there is the ALN, through the ALN review, where that was fronted by a head teacher, working alongside other head teachers, working with various groups, taking in responses, and now the funding's delegated back into schools, which is where we want to see it.
Councillor Karen, sorry.
If everything's working so well, why are we still having problems with teachers' assessment and the school tests? Because
Absolutely.
there is, it says in this report there's not standardisation of testing across the schools, which I find really difficult to understand. Yes, and also that we are still not getting these teacher assessment targets right.
It's exciting to be asked such questions. We all want to contribute to the answer to this. Let's be clear, we set ourselves a challenge as a local authority to step outside what was, I think, the worst kept open secret in Wales about no one trusts the results of teacher assessment. And we decided we'd do that in advance of the movements that we've now seen from Welsh Government and from the profession in Wales. So, but just let's put this in the context of the issues around teacher assessment are long-standing. They're not simple to resolve, and it was never going to take 1 year to get this right in the context of everyone else being measured differently and having performance compared differently and so on. The issue around application of tests, careful how I choose to say this, there are clear guidance for how tests need to be administered. People being people interpret those guidelines somewhat differently sometimes. So one of the things that heads here, without us as a local authority having to take a lead on this, said for themselves was, we want to remove any bias from misinterpretation or different interpretation from tests. And that's something that we'll be working with heads on in the next week to look at how we can clarify the best quality standard that we can have in Torvine. So again, we get to the best possible quality of data coming out of the test administration. But that's an issue that, again, impacts schools across every consortium and across every authority in Wales. I think the heads here, though, have said, but we want to get it right for us. We want to have absolute confidence that you, as a scrutiny committee and as all councillors and parents, know that those results in Torvine are accurate. So that's one of the things that we'll be looking at together.
Minutes to perhaps clarify.
Just to build on what Dermot's saying, and it's notable that Torvine did take the first step in terms of teacher assessment, in terms of a realignment. What's happening nationally since, but I'll explain the regional role in it. The Welsh Government put a contract out to tender to externally verify a proportion sample of schools across Wales, which is putting some, an additional eye in, not just your neighbours are getting theirs right, if that makes sense, although that's a 3-year programme which will take time to verify a sample. The reason the AS is involved is because we're working closely with the other 3 consortia across Wales, so there's consistency to lead on the bid. As part of it, there's common materials that are being produced this term, which will be available, common training for schools across Wales, so that we know that everyone is doing things in a much more standardised way than before in terms of teacher assessment. It's something that probably in Wales hasn't really been looked at in detail until about 2008, and to a certain extent it's something that you need to revisit more often with schools. Otherwise, the processes you use for teacher assessment and the best fit judgments you make can diverge, and there is a time to return.
I come back. I mean, I understand that teacher assessment is going to take a while to sort out. Let's be unkind. They've been doing it wrong for ages. It's going to be ages to change. It's going to take ages to get them to do it right. But I'm struggling with this standardisation of tests. I mean, it isn't that long that schools, primary schools, have not been doing tests. I mean, were they doing them wrong all along?
I think the issue, and that's why we're meeting with head teachers next week, we've got a working group now, because this is the very question we've been asking from we had a second head teachers conference back in October. And we had this very conversation with head teachers, and we had a whole raft of answers from, well, we know that some aren't administering them properly, they're giving them extra time. And I'm not saying this is happening in Torvine, but nationally, there is no, if you like, a rule book there is, but there's nobody monitoring it, is the issue. There are set guidelines and they are quite tight in that respect, but there is no monitoring procedures of those tests. So all schools have the same guidelines, all schools across Wales administer the same tests, they have a certain period that they have to administer, they'll have the dates where they can administer these tests as well. That's the same across Wales. And some of the issues that have come to light from the conversations we've had with our head teachers is, yes, but not everybody marks them the same way. So there's a whole lot of issues.
So look, I think committee's right to be frustrated that we don't have a simple answer. But really what we have, of course, are 35 schools who can interpret the rules slightly differently. To be clear, our heads have always said, look, whatever the lowest common denominator is elsewhere, that isn't the way we want to approach things in Torvine, which is why a head teacher from each cluster, and possibly more than one, will be coming to join us to look at how do we think a good quality assurance measure, what the quality assurance measure looks like in Torvine, so that we can have confidence that how we're administering tests here is as good as it should be. And that's a minor issue in terms of what we need to achieve, but they just want to tick that off so there's no confusion, and clearly then get back into the real discussion about teacher assessment, and really within teacher assessment, which we haven't talked that much about in committee, but this will emerge from the piece of work that's going on, is how do we make sure that we're looking at the value added that every child gets from day one in reception, and that child's longitudinal story through the school's process is one that every teacher builds on incrementally, so there's a clear understanding of the expected level of additional achievement that each child should have every year, and that we're not leaving the whole assessment story to the years 2, 6 and 9 teachers, or and year 11 teachers. So that's part of that journey. So that really is the focus for us. So that the testing, important, but not the key issue that we're talking about.
Yeah, far be it for me to ask for cast-iron guarantees, but I would appreciate a CEO assessment of when teachers' assessments will be fit for purpose in Torfaen.
When they will be fit for purpose. You're right. You never ask for cast iron guarantees like that, Councillor Rees. I'm stalling for time as I'm trying to formulate an answer for you. You can tell. We've said it'll take us 2 to 3 years to get to the point where we've got confidence that the system is absolutely as good as it can be. We're going into year 2 of that system now, or into that piece of work. Clearly there's a national context that we always have to regard to as well, but that's what we've agreed with heads, that we think it will take that length of time, bearing in mind the context around us is changing all the time. And with Donaldson and some of the pioneer schools and the work that they'll be doing, clearly we'll have to be cognizant of the changes to the curriculum that come along as well. But this is about honesty, this is about confidence as professionals, and what the position I think we've got to with our colleagues in Torfaen is that they don't want to play any games. They want to make sure that every class teacher knows how to assess the children in front of them, knows how they can get support if they're stuck, which is what this is about again. That's what categorisation is about. How do we put support in? And that we can all have confidence in that system. That's going to take another 2 years to get to the point we've got.
So we're looking at September 17, we'll be ready to go.
No, it's the year after, isn't it? Unless my maths lets me down, but I'm worried about that now. I think it's the year. I think we've allowed ourselves this year, the rest of this year and next year, to get to that position of confidence. Clearly within that, we've still got high expectations.
September 18.
September 18, let's go for that. But we still, and I have to say this clearly, and we'll look at this again, we've got clear, we're just looking at the target setting process at the moment, we clearly still expect standards to improve, and for that data, particularly in primary, but also in Key Stage 3, the validity of that data to improve again and see real impact for those children.
Yes, I was going to ask exactly the same question as Jeff, and use the word fit for purpose as well, if you like, because in regarding the timescales, if you like, it is a concern of mine, if you like, and basically how long it is going to be taken, if like, is there anything that can be done to expedite, if you like, bringing it forward, because obviously it's key at the end of the day, it's like the teacher's assessment.
It's a follow-on from that, really. I mean, I'm sure that if there's anybody out there watching this, right, ordinary members of the public, they will find it astounding that schools do not assess each school national tests, right, in exactly the same way, because you know we're going to find out that there's GCSE results somewhere that some school is not assessing the same way as everybody else. I mean, this is a concern. This is a national test, and I understand it's a primary school level. But it is affecting, I mean, yeah, okay, I've made a giant leap, I understand that. But I would say it does affect our teachers' assessment, because I mean, this is a very crude way of putting it and really nasty, and I'm sure if the teachers' trade unions hear me saying this, they'll want me hung. But I mean, the bottom line is, right, if they're fiddling the national test results.
Chair, I have to come in, because I think and I'm sorry to interrupt. Look, no one is suggesting at any point in this discussion that any teacher in Torfaen or any school in Torfaen is deliberately cheating in any test. Can I just make that really clear? What we said, heads just wanted to make sure that we've got the protocol for test administration really strong so we've got confidence. That is not the core of what we're talking about. I don't want us to lose that. The core is about what happens in every classroom in terms of teachers' ability to assess the impact of their teaching on the learning of children in classrooms every day. Not about the tests per se. So the piece of work in terms of the national pilot, in terms of the discussion we're having with teachers in Torvine, and I think the question that Councillor Rees was asking me to answer about when will we have real confidence that that is now accurate and as good as it can be. I think we're about a third of the way through that process, and I think it'll take us the next year or two to have that real confidence, say, look, we think that's accurate now, we've got reliability, and we'll know that, to come back to your question that you asked earlier, because we'll be asking heads, do they think that's the case, and we'll be asking teachers that, because clearly that's something we're co-constructing together.
Can I bring Ed in a minute? Sorry.
It's just one point of clarity on the complexity of teacher assessment, and it's to build on Dermot's point that there is no suggestion of that at all in schools. It is the fact that a level 4 or a level 5 at end of primary school is incredibly broad as a descriptor of what a child can do, and it is a difficult job in terms of a teacher's professional judgment. The vast majority of children are a level 4 or a level 5. The ones that we look at in the cluster work that we do across Torvine, and to have other teachers' eyes on that as well, is the borderline children. Although it is still possible with those borderline children to have disagreement, if that makes sense, on the view of what they can achieve with reams of evidence. It is not as simple as, say, administering a test, and by a test I mean an exam, where if you get 70, you're an A, if you get 69, you're a B. It's as simple as that. It's that borderline. That's where the national work will strengthen teachers' confidence to make those judgments accurately nationally.
And just to finish, because I keep coming back to this, the reason we're doing that work is to make sure that we can have confidence that we'll see further improvement in the literacy and numeracy skills of our young people, particularly in primary and in secondary, because we know that's where we need to focus our efforts and get those outcomes.
Which you can Dermot answer my question, because you passed me my question straight on to Glyn.
Sorry, would you like to repeat it then?
It's a case of, in regarding what we were doing, is there anything that can be done to expedite, if like the time frame, if like I bring it forward? What support, if anything, can the council give to, if like, to help you, if like bring the timescales? I know you were talking about 2018, but is there anything that can be done to bring that timescale forward?
You asked me that question during a budget build round. There's an obvious answer. I don't think the answer is resources. I think the answer is that we're working at pace with head teachers who are taking the lead in this piece of work in Torvine. We clearly get good support from our colleagues in the ES and nationally, because clearly we've got colleagues who are still on our recovery board from Ceredigion, but also we're talking to local authorities elsewhere beyond our borders, and I know that the consortia are working obviously on a national basis too. So I don't think there is more that we can do at the moment. The issue for us as a local authority is to make sure that we keep going at pace. We've agreed with heads that we'll continue that piece of work, that we'll see some the feedback from the meeting next week, go out to schools before Christmas. We've got regular meetings planned throughout the year to make sure that we can build on what's coming out of the national pilot, and to make sure that we continue well beyond Eston, well beyond scrutiny committees and so on, so that every head teacher feels that we've got a system that's fit for purpose in Torvine, and that will deliver those outcomes for us. So I don't think this is an issue of resource. I think it's an issue of the support that scrutiny gives in asking the difficult questions is absolutely helpful, and clearly the scrutiny subcommittee, not for me to tell you what to ask schools, of course, but in terms of clearly this is part of our work programme going forward. It's a critical piece of work. I'm sure heads will expect you to question them, and it is your role as governors, of course, as well, is to ask those questions in those fora.
Just to add to what Dermot says, in regards to the resources, and is there any way we can accelerate the progress in regards to teacher assessment? We know that there are fantastic practices out there in our schools. It's not, and it is about collaboration. It is about sharing best practice. That's not going to happen overnight, and that's what, part of these, and one of the key focuses of meeting next week with head teachers, they will have clear actions, and that's why we want as many representatives from each cluster there, because those head teachers will be representing their clusters and talking on behalf, and therefore if we're agreeing to actions, so that we can move forward as quickly as we can, so that we don't have to wait for them to take it back, to do this, to do that, and then move forward. We will have very clear actions and very clear deadlines against those actions for us to be able to keep the momentum going, and so that, yes, we can measure the impact that they're going to have.
And that's what I wanted to really ask to begin with. In regarding all this started a couple of years, about a year or so ago, when it comes to the heads conference, if you like, which everyone, I would imagine, would be on board. Obviously, now you're going down to the finer nitty-gritties. Are all headmasters still on board as such?
I would say the majority, yes.
And basically, those who aren't, why aren't they?
That's something discussions we'll be having with schools, but on the whole, let's take teacher assessment for example. Last year we were first in Wales at Key Stage 2. This summer we came in 21st in Wales. We couldn't have done that without a buy-in from all our head teachers on the target setting process. So yes, in that respect, yes, we have got a buy-in from all our head teachers. Do all of them turn up on the conferences? The majority of them do, or if they don't, they send representatives. So in that respect, I would say, yes, we do have a buy-in. We haven't had any resistance in that respect.
In regarding the heads, though, because of the nature of what's being discussed, if like, surely it's imperative for the heads to be there. And if I attend any meeting knowing that an organisation or whatever is sending a representative, if you like, I think it dampens it, if you like, and because at the end of the day, if like the information has got to go back to the head.
Can I say, surely that governors should ask as well. Is this school taking part in the head teachers conferences? Are we fully on board with the initiatives? Perhaps we should all, put that on our checklist to our governors' meetings.
Because it's not just the head teachers. Governors are part of the leadership of that school, and in past governors' meetings, we've, whatever directive we've taken with head teachers, we have passed that information on.
Have you inquired as to why heads aren't attending and they're sending representatives?
Yes, they were asked. There was a conference on at the same day we had our conference. There was a conference where the Education Minister was talking in Cardiff, and that was put on since. So some were going there, so hence representatives were coming. But they had sent not just apologies, but they'd sent their permission, if you like, to say we will agree to move things forward. We're not opposing to anything, because they'd had the agenda, they knew what the discussion was likely, and therefore we had their buy-in, if you like.
Chair, just to sort of offer a reassurance here, I suppose the question is, what if you do all this work and you don't take part and declare independence? You don't have the options, the bottom line, in the sense that if we as a schools community and the local authority agree that's good practice, unless you can show us a model that's better, at least as good or better, you're going to have a challenge on that. And that's the challenge that we're having with heads already. So we're in the middle of target setting process at the moment. Sharon mentioned last year we saw a significant downturn in reported results. We're very sensitive this year to make sure that we get that target setting right again, that schools don't feel some of the pressure sometimes. They think, hang on a minute, our results can go back up. We expect we will see an improvement this year, but that will be based on real progress. That will be based on very detailed individual knowledge of those particular pupils. And in the 4 or 5 cases that we looked at yesterday, we're going back to have a discussion with schools where we don't quite understand the logic of how they've arrived at some of those targets, and that may be entirely justifiable. That's absolutely the case. The ES have already had a discussion with the schools. We want to satisfy ourselves. So heads are very clear that this is the what the expectation is. If schools don't adhere to that, There is a challenge there. There has to be, and that will be the case with the collective position we arrive at around assessment in Torvine. The policy was agreed by heads. This is the next iteration and development in that policy, so we expect adherence. And I take your point again, Chair, about that is a role for governors to ask those questions, absolutely. Unless the school is something that they think is at least as good or better. And my challenge to them would be, if that's the case, it's not acceptable that you keep that to yourself. It's not okay for schools to be independent and say, we've got really good practice and we're going to keep it. Council taxpayers expect every school to be the best school possible. So if there's good practice in Torvine and it's a function of being a green school in terms of categorisation, you have to share that practice. You don't get to keep it special just for your children. All of our children are equally important.
Councillor Brooke.
Yes, there's been a lot said about offering evidence as to what's gone on. What has been said just recently now is that there are going to be some decisions taken within the next week or two, we've been told, that was what was just said, as to the way forward. So there will be something that is then measurable. It's been suggested, once again, that governors should take responsibility for this. We've got to remember that the governors are not the paid staff here. The head teachers are the paid staff. Now, at the end of the day, when people ask for governors to ask questions, how can they ask questions about something that they might not actually be fully aware of? Now, you have just said that during the course of the next couple of weeks, you are going to be putting together some decisions which are measurable. We'll be able to measure them. What I'm asking for is whatever is agreed to be forwarded in the first instance to the members of this committee, so they know what was agreed, so as anybody that sits on this panel here and sits on a secondary school in particular, they would know what questions to ask, to be able to inquire how things are progressing. Because every time we come here and we talk about things, we listen to things and it's mentioned about right across the piece of who the EAS look after. Then it gets talked about nationally. It's Torvine that are in special measures, and that's what we want to know about, Torvine. It's Torvine that are being criticised for being in special measures and all the rest of this, and people are just asking pretty simple questions. When do you think that this will come to an end? So I'm going to ask the same question I've asked at the last 3 meetings. Can anybody give us any indication as to when this comes to the end? Where there is a date? When is it going to happen?
You're asking me to tempt a fate out, down to look in the eye. We're in the middle of our monitoring visit this week, which should be, and we expect to be our final monitoring visit. So we'll have feedback on Friday morning. And at that point, I'm sure the Chief Exec will be putting a briefing note out to everyone on the outcome of that visit. Our expectation is that we are now able to meet all of our statutory functions without the support of a recovery board, and that's what we've written in our self-evaluation. I can't say anything more than that at the moment because I've only had informal feedback from the Eston team, and they're only part way through their monitoring visit. So we will be able to be in a position to give an unofficial not unofficial, we'll be able to give you a brief draft on Friday, subject to obviously correspondence then from the Chief Inspector.
Can I just say about that, what Councillor Brooks was saying about the sort of ongoing discussions about the assessments and the work that will be going on? It is usual that when you've done another piece of work or a policy development that you call the chairs together, all the chairs of all the comps and the primaries, and explain that to them. So you would be doing the same thing with that, really, wouldn't you? So at least chairs of governors would know, heads would know, and then there would be a meeting of all chairs for chairs. They could then filter that down to the rest of the governing body. So,
any policy development, any policy has to be adopted by the governing body of the school, and there should be a discussion around that policy rather than a simple vote. And we would expect, with something so important for where we're going, that would be discussed fully at every governing body because it would need to be formally adopted.
Can I just...
The point that I was making was there never seems to be any conclusions to any of the things that have put forward. So at the end of the day, you've never got the data to be able to take forward. It becomes somebody's opinion. And I think that several speakers here have been asking for evidence that something has actually happened. Councillor Rees has asked, Councillor Kemp has asked a couple of times here about evidence. And I still can't come to terms with the fact that it doesn't seem to be available. And that's the only point that I linger on. I listen carefully. I haven't said anything this afternoon until now, because I've listened to everything that's gone on. But at the end of the day, there's got to be something tangible that you can ask a question on, and not make yourself out to be a bit of a fool when you ask it. At the end of the day, it's a simple thing. Things need to be evidence-based. In anything that you do in society, it has to be evidence-based. It's been asked for this afternoon several times, and I haven't heard anything yet that has suggested that any evidence is available.
I can only say I think we have presented the evidence. I think the evidence is very tangible. It's available to you, and we're more than happy to have a discussion about it. If there's something that you don't feel you currently have that we can give you. I think we were talking about the process around the discussion that has yet to happen, and you asked for the outcome of that, which we'll be more than happy to make available, to give an update to scrutiny as we go through that piece of developmental work with head teachers. And we've also said today, and I can only repeat what we've already said, we said we were in the middle of a process, so is there a tangible outcome that we've agreed? Well, the answer is no. We were asked to state when we think that will be completely embedded. We think that will take us another this year and next year, but we'll have a product before then, which will be the outcome of those meetings, which we'll happily share and bring back for scrutiny.
And the different steps of the process, we're not going to complete the process in one big loop, as it were. There'll be different parts to the process, and we can feed back to those parts as along the way.
Can I ask what is happening in between, if like within the schools? Are the schools still doing their own things, if you like?
Sorry.
In terms of what's happening in the meantime, what we develop the new policy.
With teacher assessment? Yeah. No. The key part of moderation, it has been a part for the last few years, has been cluster moderation. It is the responsibility of local authorities to oversee that picture, but through the AS. But clusters work together to, as I described earlier, to moderate pieces of work. Welsh Government have strengthened the statutory instrument for that from September to put the need to report to local authorities and to provide feedback to schools should there be issues with the moderation as other teachers see it. But that's where the statutory instrument lies at the moment, in the power of clusters of schools.
It's a point that Councillor Brooks raised, and I agree with him. It's about governing bodies and what we expect governing bodies to do. I've got a governing body meeting on Monday, and I think we've got 8 or 9 items on the agenda, all of them about policy. And we might get through that, we might not. Do you really think that governing bodies are in a position to hold head teachers to account in terms of teacher assessment in a meeting like that?
I think the key to governors holding head teachers and school leadership to account is training for those governors. Data training is now mandatory for all governors to attend.
But the issue I'm trying to make is that the agendas are so fully loaded with policy now, we can't actually get down to the nitty-gritty of what we need to do.
I think there's a real point there. I think there's a big load on governors. I mean, that's an absolutely fair point. That's why Welsh Government's looking at the support for governors on a national basis, and also looking at the role of governors, I think, going forward. It's part of the reason why we brought consultant governors in as a pilot for us to look to see how we can support governing bodies who are finding difficulty to be there as a problem-solving support for them. There is a huge burden in terms of time, and I know, having been to lots of governing bodies meetings and just been amazed at the amount of things on the agendas, there is a real pressure there. I think clearly then the focus of the training is about prioritising what are the key issues for governors to focus their attention and their time on, and to make sure that they are equipped to see through all of the various demands and really hone in on that core set of issues that they have to be cited on, and being equipped to ask the right questions. that's going to be an ongoing discussion, I think, with the Welsh Government and us as a school community again, to see how we can support governing bodies to do that better.
Just very quickly, do you think the clerk of the governing bodies has a greater role to play in advising the governors what's important on the agenda and what's not?
I think they've got a critical role. I think it depends on which governing body we're talking about, because I'm sure, and I can only reflect back what chairs of governors have said to me in our meetings, is that there is a variability in terms of the quality of clerks. Lots of schools are very, very happy, and that is an issue where if a governing body feels that they're not getting the service they need to, then clearly if that clerk is provided through the EAS, then we've got mechanisms in place to talk about how we can improve that. If the clerk isn't provided by the EAS, then we need to talk, you need to talk as a governing body with the local authority to see how we can support you with that.
We should carry on, Sharon. Is there anything that you wanted?
Just to come back on the governor front, we had our head teachers conference on the Thursday. On the Saturday, we also put on workshops for governors. We opened it up to all governors. A message would have gone to your chair of governors, an invitation well in advance, and your chair, because I don't have all your email addresses, as you can appreciate. We don't hold everybody's email addresses. It went to the chairs to invite all governors to come to. We had a very similar Saturday morning workshop of what took place in the head teachers conference. ALN issues, our focus on teacher assessment, our focus on the national test, everything that was discussed with head teachers, we then repeated on a Saturday morning on the 24th of October at Westmorn, where all governors were invited to attend, where we would brief them and have that discussion.
Okay. How many attended?
7 governors. 7.
7 people.
7.
Therefore, it's the wrong day to hold the meeting in it on the Saturday. If only 7 governors out of every school in the county borough of Torvine turned up on that day, is that not an answer to why people don't know what's going on? I have to turn around. I'll speak personally. You wouldn't get me there on a Saturday morning. I have other duties that I have to do in other organisations on that day. It's not the best day in the world, Saturday morning, to ask people, governors, to attend meetings.
Chair, can I just come back? Clearly there is an issue where, because I was with Sharon when we had the discussion with the chairs of governors and they requested that time is the best one. We will never choose a time that is going to be appropriate or for everyone to be able to attend. So there is an issue about, and it comes back to Councillor Rees' point about the demand on governors. Chairs of governors, we've met with regularly and continue to meet with regularly to cascade key messages and seek their views and get their involvement in terms of the consultant governor pilot to make sure we have a way into every governing body. Because clearly we cannot physically attend every single governing body as officers either, because we just don't have enough people to do that. So we will continue to work with TASG as well, which is not a well attended meeting by governors, to try and find as many possible ways in, which is why we look at our written communication and try and be as flexible as possible. So
we better move on now. Just can you make
all I would say is basically the governors, they also have a responsibility at the end of the day, and basically that needs to be installed in their brain right from the word go. And basically it's the chicken and the egg. Is case of a lot of the time governors are asked to basically go on a governing body, but they don't really know what it's about. And so for me it's basically informing people in general about what governorship is all about, and then and only then making them aware of what positions are available, because then they know exactly what is in front of them and the responsibilities and the amount of time that they need to actually commit to that particular role.
I don't want to prolong this, Chair, but there's been a lot said about everything here this afternoon, but how many governors turned up Monday night for compulsory training on secondary school data? Not many. And not many sat around this table either.
Okay, can we move on? Sharon, did you wish to carry on? Is there anything else that you wish to...
I think just to say, the improvements, we've talked about what we have done. We've talked about our Key Stage 4 improvements. So our next steps for us, this is what we're looking at the end of this year. What are we looking to achieve? Well, we're looking at to achieve 60% for Key Stage 4 Level 2 inclusive, which will be a massive achievement for us, bearing in mind where we were in 2011. We've gone through the target setting process. We think it's a very doable feast. Looking at last year, we mentioned about 80% or more of our schools being categorised as yellow or better. Come January, we would have achieved that performance measure, 80%. Categorisation, we've just had verification on categorisation in our schools, and it's looking very likely that we'll be able to meet that in January. When you're looking then, coming back to the national test, we're saying there that we want at least 84% of our pupils to achieve in the national test. And again, that's what we are pushing for. We're not resting on our morals. Yes, we've done a lot, but we've recognised we've got a lot more to do. And that's why we're working so hard. We're working collaboratively with our head teachers and governing bodies to bring everybody. It's not just our responsibility, it's a collective responsibility, if you like. It's a collective collaboration so that everybody is aware of what our priorities are and how we're going to get there, if that makes sense.
21 there, we say all schools categorised as amber will have an education improvement board. Can I ask, is that comps, do you mean primaries as well?
Basically, this has come out of our work with schools and challenge community schools. One of the most effective things that we found in keeping our relationships with the school and working with them and strengthening those bridges was through the AIBs, the Academic Improvement Boards. So we decided as an organisation that to mimic that, obviously couldn't call it an AIB, so we called it an EIB, an Education Improvement Board, and it's for all amber schools, primary and secondary, and it's also, we have it running in 1 or 2 yellows where, for instance, we have a specific issue around target setting, for instance, and therefore we need to keep a closer working eye on a monthly basis or on a half-termly basis with those. So they're actually being set. I've sent Sharon some dates already for 3 of our primary amber schools. But the idea is that it's a way of tracking on a more regular, rigorous basis and allowing the school to demonstrate the evidence. So it's not just a conversation that, oh yes, we're on track. It's, right, well, if you're on track, which pupils, when, and show me the evidence, look at the books and everything else.
Who would be
Right, the makeup of that board is basically the challenge advisor will chair it. It's the head. We have said that basically a representative of the governing body, chair would be preferential, but obviously a representative of the governing body, and then a representative from the local authority and the PCA. Now, with all those meetings, you can't attend everyone. So basically, we will be sort of dropping in on a regular basis and covering off all the schools. So, but it's the challenge advisor who will be chairing those meetings, and there will be formal meetings and formal action points. If you have a look at the template that comes out of those meetings, there's agreed actions for the school, agreed actions for the AS, agreed actions for the local authority, and then that's the first agenda point at the next meeting is the progress against that.
So that's happening at the moment then, is it?
They're underway, yeah, they're starting, yeah.
Okay.
Quite different. I did want to come in on the issue around schools to school, because in the SER we talk very much about self-improving schools. I've taken from what you've said that there's a lot of it going on and a lot of positive. Is it equal? Are the comps collaborating school to school as well as the primary? Are we doing any school-to-school collaboration within the EAS outside of the local authority, and how is that all working?
basically it's permeating at all levels. So if I start with things like the Excellence in Leadership programme, the Excellence in Teaching, the Breaking Through, that's actually school-to-school collaboration. We've identified schools where there's a particular practice, and then training events are done using that, and then they go back into the schools. So there's a lot of schools happening through the excellence programs and the breaking through programs. That's both primary and secondary. Layered over that, you've got the, obviously we've touched on categorisation, we've got the building excellence program through the Green to Green School collaboration program. That's actually occurring across the region. So for instance, Maindy is with Langstone in Newport, and I can't remember the third one, sorry, but paired with 2 other green schools, but from outside authorities, and they basically work together. So there's, with that school, we've got the triads that have been set up by the local authority where schools are working. We've got work going within clusters. So, for instance, the Abersychan cluster. We've talked a lot about Abersychan. Abersychan actually has done some excellent work as a cluster with its primaries, and interestingly, one of the big cluster projects between the comprehensive and its feeder schools was to look at attendance. And the attendance has gone up in every one of the primary schools in the cluster, and it's the secondary school where the attendance has stagnated. So we tried to unpick that at the moment. But we've actually got an awful lot of good work going on. You can even call on then the executive head teacher thing. So there's a lot of collaboration, for instance, between Blenheim and Coediva, because obviously Jill Ellis is the executive head between the two, between Woodlands and St David's, because Jackie Bates is the executive head. So we've actually got an awful lot of school-to-school working within the authority, within the local authority, within the EAS, across the secondary primary boundaries, and across into the regions as well. And increasingly, the evidence coming from that, we are just in the process now of QAing all the green schools categorisation reports, because obviously they do it a slightly different way to the way we do a normal school. So there is a well of evidence now building up about the impact of school-to-school collaboration and the impact, and we can actually demonstrate, coming back to hard evidence that we were saying, in terms, I mentioned the attendance figures, for instance, in the Abersychan cluster. You look at sort of Garnteg's attendance and Comfredor and places like that. So we're actually building up factual evidence to support it. And that was actually mentioned, and we were actually positively commented on by Mel Ainscough in the Recovery Board. Because one of Mel's big things through the Recovery Board is the school-to-school work, and he sees that as the sustainable future of school improvement. And when we explained this to him, his comment was actually, well, we need to broadcast this nationally, and Welsh Government need to know, and so on. So there's a lot of good practice going on. Still more work to be done. You know, we're still not satisfied, because until all this good practice is disseminated across every one of our schools, I think there's the comment you made earlier on, Dermot, but it's gone way beyond green shoots.
I think that the point you made there about the collaboration with Abersychan, with the primaries, I think that was very evident when we had the schools monitoring meeting. You know, the work that was going on there. I mean, they seemed to be working in leaps and bounds there with that. So.
Can I ask another one? And I know I'm skipping about, but this was one that you actually mentioned just recently when you were talking, and that's the 84% of pupils reaching expected levels. You seem to think that was quite an aspirational thing, and yet it's probably the term expected levels, but it doesn't sound aspirational. But shouldn't we be looking for perhaps a level above that, in the sense that, you know, shouldn't there be a target for a level above that? Because that level above is the level at which we'd really be expecting to start outperforming nationally.
I think it's about terminology almost. It's the terminology. The expected level of performance at Key Stage 2 is level 4. then there's the expected level plus 1, which is the 5, and it's the same at Key Stage 3, where the expected level is a level 5, and then level 6 is the expected level plus 1. So it's using sort of national terminology, and really, I don't disagree with you. If you look at Key Stage 3, for instance, pupils who get the level 6 plus, their chances of obtaining the higher grades at GCSE going through, are massively different to those who get the level 5. So by saying that the level 5 is the expected level, in some ways you're almost condoning underperformance in that respect, but it is an appropriate target, the 84%.
Chair, just to add to that, I think what we're trying to, and we can make this clear, because the issue for us is that in terms of our outcomes in literacy and numeracy, national literacy and numeracy tests, we are well below where we should be. So getting back to expected levels is for us and for our schools going to be, not all, because we've got lots of schools, okay, but there were a significant number of schools, which means that the overall performance of the borough comes down. We want to see every school at least get to where we should be, and clearly that target will get reviewed on an annual basis and forms part of the work of that working group. So that's really signalling we know we've got a lot of work to do with those basic national literacy and numeracy tests.
I think we agreed as well that one of the other areas we're going to be looking at is literacy and numeracy in our scrutiny committee. So I don't know if we're going to have a task and finish group or how we'll approach that, but we did say in our pre-agenda that we thought that was a really big topic for us to look at. Thank you all very much for your time and information. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out very much. Thanks. Good to see you, Julian, as well. Yeah. Okay, would you like to perhaps look at the recommendations that we need to make? Did you manage to make any notes for us, Leanne?
One thing that worried one thing that worried me is that they seem to paint a very rosy picture about their relationship with head teachers, and I didn't think there's any clear evidence to suggest that there is. And I'm a little bit worried if they're over-egging their pudding in that regard, and that might be a weakness going forward. So whether they can find a way to measure if they are actually improving their relationship with head teachers or not, that might be something they might want to consider doing.
I think, I do know that the executive member for education has been visiting all the schools with, along with the chair of governors if they wish. I mean, I was part of one of those visits, so I think, that is something that didn't happen before, I understand. I don't know whether any other members...
We're talking from a... As was made clear, was it was from a non-existent base?
I think, I think this is the second year he is doing a whole load of school visits now at the moment. So
going to visit somebody doesn't mean that there's a professional relationship that's making school improvement a priority in the school. That's not... We need to see some evidence that that is actually happening, that the relationship in some tangible way is improving.
Sorry. There was no... I think there was a bad relationship between schools and the LEA. That relationship improved dramatically a couple of years ago, but I am with Jeff. I'm not convinced that relationship has improved beyond that dramatic jump that you saw.
Just going on what people are saying.
Yeah, it is anecdotal evidence rather than contribute here was this, right? That it is suggested that it isn't 100% by any means. I think that was almost said. So doesn't somebody think that that school governing body should be made very, very aware that that is the case? How would they know? And this is where the points were being made by members of this committee. You're saying, well, can you give us evidence? If there's 100 head teachers, are we saying that all 100 attend or only 50 attend? Now, I would have thought myself that was a pretty simple question to ask, but we weren't told that, because schools, the governing bodies, which they're saying should take some responsibility here, how can they when they don't know whether they're attending the meetings or not?
I think one way in which we could get that information and keep abreast in regarding what's going on, in regarding these heads meetings, whatever they are, surely there would be some form of documentation in regarding minutes taken, if you like, and action points, etc. And that would be a very, very useful document to actually receive, so that we can address who exactly is attending and basically what is being discussed and who's going to do what and when.
Points that you wanted to make? Recommendations?
Well, I don't know whether I'd particularly welcome a commitment for teacher assessment to be fit for purpose by September 2018.
And also there's still that nagging feeling in the back about how national tests, statutory tests, are being administered. It still feels very iffy. I mean, I've heard stories of, particularly of tests being done at different times and on different days. And the thing is that who's to say that a test won't go from one school to the pupils of another school?
I think what we need to do is to ask if, when they've done the piece of work on the teacher assessments, that we scrutinise it again. So that could be a recommendation, that we have another meeting with them to look at that. Okay, as soon as
I think
it's
we're
available.
in the middle of things at the moment, aren't we? It's as simple as that, and so give it one more year, and I would be looking more in depth in regarding what has been achieved over the last year and a half.
Recommendation that we ask for a scrutiny on that as soon as it's available. Jeff, did you wish to?
Yeah, what about recommendation that a value for money model to assess PDG is developed as soon as possible?
Yes, I think that's something that they...
And school child income as well.
Yeah.
I know I brought it forward, but I don't think it was adopted or agreed, if like, in regarding receiving minutes in regarding the head teachers' meetings, etc. I don't know if that is something what can be recommended.
I don't know where, if you're asking where they would go, unless we asked that the executive member was aware of the attendance.
Because it's not only about the attendance, it's basically what's happening. If you
Collaboration,
like, if there's, as in what's being discussed, if you like, any action plans, and basically who's going to do it, if you like. It's just keeping in the loop, if you like, at the end of the day.
I don't know whether... we can ask about the documentation then that goes with those meetings and see how available that is.
One of the things I think this committee needs is, I mean, it says in this report, progress across the SEC schools has been disappointing as a whole. I think what this committee needs to be secure in its knowledge is that those links that we are being told are in place between Welsh Government and this authority are in place, and I think we need to have a bit more information about them, because the Schools Challenge Cymru money is a significant sum of money, but we have had considerable difficulties in this first year, or in the first year that's just gone, gaining any sort of insight behind what the Welsh Government thinking is on how this is going to work and whatever. It seems to me that it hasn't made if what we've heard today, it hasn't made a significant improvement that was hoped for it, I think we need to make sure that we have some feedback from whatever this collaboration is between Welsh Government and the SEC monies and our local authority to ensure that we have a full understanding of what Welsh Government believed was going to happen, actually did happen, and where they're going forward with it. Because these are our schools, and frankly, I don't want the Welsh, the Welsh Government, we wrote to the Minister, we got a letter back from the Minister, which more or less said, let's be blunt, mind your own business. I think that's not a good enough response, given what's actually happened after the end of the first year, and we need to have more faith in the Welsh Government and what they are doing to ensure that SEC works.
We'd send that recommendation to the executive member and ask him to look into that for us. Would you agree that...
Dermot as well. I think Dermot needs to be in that because he indicated that he's going to be involved in discussions with the Minister alongside the executive member.
Would you suggest as well that we send to the Schools Monitoring Committee that they look again at the Schools Challenge Cymru schools and look at the value for money there? So they could look at that, and then this Scrutiny Committee could look at the PDG grants and the impact.
I think the links that Julian was alluding to between the PDG, the EIG and the Education Improvement Grant, and all these, and how all these are linked, because I think it's, you heard what Dermot said, it's like knitting fog, trying to see where, and what worries me about all of this is we will end up driving up the attainment of free school meals pupils, but what we'll see is the free school meals pupils are going like that, and the non-free school meals pupils are coming down like that, and we are losing sight of the overall goal. We will end up focusing too much on free school meals that we're losing attainment amongst those who are not on free school meals.
Are there any other comments that you wanted to make?
It's perhaps about enough at the moment, isn't it? It's better to have some things there that you can concentrate and get some answers on, rather than because I'm very conscious of the fact at the end of the day you try not to be critical, but all of these officers have jobs in the real day coming to us, and the more we give them to do, the more they have to spread themselves wide to be able to do it. So if we ask them to give us information on perhaps a little less, they then may have the time, because what we are saying is that we're not being critical, we're trying not to be critical, but what we are saying is that we are unhappy that things that are being said to us doesn't seem to be supported very well with some evidence. Now, the reason probably behind that is that they just haven't got time to collate it all. So, because they are assuring us that everything is going relatively well, so let's try to make the job easier for them, and then we can be, shall we say, much more confident across what we are at the moment.
E3 sort of scrutiny issues there. I think we've done it, really, haven't we? The target set in there, working with heads to improve, and the impact DAS on free school meals, PDG. So I think we've more or less covered all of those 3 points. Okay. We move to then the date of the next meeting is the 3rd of February, and I think with your permission, I think the EAS, we need to look at the commissioning arrangement of the EAS and the new model. I think that Dermot is very keen to share with us. Okay. Thanks.